On a quiet August afternoon in 2003, a small city in Pennsylvania became the center of one of the strangest investigations in American history. A case so tangled, so theatrical, so layered with secrets, that authorities themselves admitted it felt less like real life and more like a mystery film written by a chaotic genius. And at the center of it all, a local pizza delivery man who walked into a bank carrying a note, a handmade contraption locked around his neck, and a story no one could fully believe. For years, the world debated one question. Was he a willing participant or the first casualty of someone else's game? This is the story of the collar incident, one of the most complex criminal plots ever uncovered in the United States. Brian Douglas Wells lived an ordinary life. He worked as a pizza delivery driver, kept to a small circle of friends, and spent most of his days in Erie, a place best described as quiet, worn, and unremarkable. People who knew him described him with the same handful of phrases: soft-spoken, routine-driven, predictable, which is why the events of August 28, 2003 felt impossible. Around 1:30 p.m., Brian received a delivery call. The location was a television tower site on a rural road, not a normal destination. The order, 2 small pizzas. He drove out anyway. Minutes after he arrived, everything shifted. Brian re-emerged with a large metal collar locked around his neck and a set of instructions. To this day, investigators dispute whether he agreed to the plan or was forced into it. But one thing is certain. From the moment he left that tower site, Brian was no longer in control of his own life. Brian walked into the PNC Bank on Peach Street holding a note. It demanded money, a specific amount, with specific instructions on how to hand it over. He was calm, almost eerily calm. Surveillance footage shows him standing at the counter, waiting as though this were a routine errand. He told employees the collar was real, and that he had been sent there by unknown individuals who were watching him. When Brian walked out, he carried a bag of cash and a second note, directing him to follow a scavenger hunt-style sequence of stops. The notes were written with bizarre precision, detailed enough to show planning, chaotic enough to suggest a mind unhinged. For authorities, everything about this situation was unprecedented. A handmade mechanism, a sequence of riddles, a terrified man insisting he was just a pawn. They had no idea that behind this event was a cast of characters whose lives were tangled long before this day. Shortly after leaving the bank, Brian was stopped by police in a nearby parking lot. They restrained him, unsure whether he was the architect of this plan or its victim. The mechanism around his neck ticked. Investigators scrambled, unsure what was real and what was bluff. Minutes later, the worst-case scenario unfolded. The device activated. Brian's life ended before medical help could arrive. What happened in that parking lot was captured on news cameras and broadcast across the country. Overnight, the small city of Erie became the focus of national attention. But even then, even as the story spread everywhere, no one understood the true scope of the conspiracy behind the collar incident. That understanding would take years. Chapter 4: The Mastermind. Enter Marjorie Deal Armstrong. Brilliant, manipulative, unpredictable, and, according to nearly everyone who knew her, capable of planning things far more complex than most people realized.
She's had many men in her life fall victim to bizarre deaths by her hand and also by odd circumstances.
Marjorie struggled for years with severe mental and emotional instability. She was involved in past cases, past violent incidents, and a long pattern of destructive relationships. But in the collar case, she was not alone. Investigators soon connected her to a man named Bill Rothstein, an intelligent, eccentric figure who lived in a house filled with inventions, scrap metal, and half-finished mechanical projects. Rothstein would eventually call authorities to his home months after the collar incident. Not about the collar case, but about a different body in his freezer. A separate crime entirely, yet involving the same small circle of people. That's when investigators realized this wasn't one event. It was the tip of an iceberg. As detectives unraveled the connections between Marjorie, Rothstein, and several others, including a man named Kenneth Barnes, known locally for dealing substances and solving problems for pay, a clearer picture emerged. The collar incident was not a random act. It was a coordinated, multi-person plan built over months. According to federal filings, the goal was to obtain a large sum of money. Multiple accomplices played roles, building the mechanism, writing notes, luring Brian. There were rehearsals, trial runs, and arguments over who should act as the courier. Brian may have originally agreed to participate, believing the mechanism was harmless, only to realize too late that it was anything but. Even among the conspirators, betrayal was constant. No one trusted anyone else, and by the end, nearly everyone turned on everyone. When investigators pieced it together, they described it as a plot so tangled, it almost felt fictional. The case officially broke open when Kenneth Barnes began cooperating with federal agents. He described the plan step by step. He explained who built what, who wrote what, who gave orders, and he named Marjorie as the primary architect. Federal investigators corroborated many of his claims through notes, interviews, recovered materials, and physical evidence. Over time, Marjorie herself would confirm parts of the story, even as she denied others with ferocity. The final picture that emerged was chilling. A group of unstable, desperate individuals. A plan that mutated into something far more dangerous than originally intended. And a delivery driver who became ensnared in something much bigger than himself. Trial verdicts would eventually be delivered years after the event. But the truth? Much of it still feels incomplete. Some evidence went missing. Some testimonies contradicted each other. Rothstein passed away before he could be fully interrogated. And Marjorie's mental state deteriorated over time, raising questions about what she truly remembered. Two decades later, investigators still debate one central question. Was Brian a collaborator or a victim from the start? The official record suggests a hybrid, someone who was lured into a small role, then unexpectedly overpowered and used as a disposable pawn. But not everyone agrees. Some agents insist Brian was fully aware of the plan. Others believe he was set up from the beginning, chosen specifically because he was gullible and non-confrontational. The truth may never be known, because the people who designed this plot were unreliable narrators, liars, manipulators, narcissists, and opportunists. The only consistent thing about their story is how inconsistent it is. The collar incident remains one of the most bizarre criminal cases in modern American history. A scavenger hunt trail, a handmade mechanism, a cast of unstable personalities, a plan fueled by money, desperation, and delusion. In the end, no one profited. No one succeeded. Everyone involved either lost their life, lost their freedom, or lost their sanity. It was a carefully designed scheme, executed by people with no control over themselves. A contradiction at every level, and a case that defies simple explanation. Because sometimes the truth isn't stranger than fiction. Sometimes it is fiction, written by people who didn't know the difference.